My name is Helen Martinez, and I'm 62 years old. 3 years ago, I lost my husband Robert to a sudden heart attack, and since then, I've been living alone in our family home in Sacramento. What I thought was my biggest challenge was managing my type 2 diabetes with daily insulin shots. I never imagined that the person I trusted most, my own son David, would try to use my medication to steal everything I had worked for. But that evening, everything I thought I knew about my son was about to change. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories that matter. Let me take you back to that Tuesday evening when my world turned upside down. I've called this house home for 35 years now. Robert and I bought it when David was just 3 years old, back when Sacramento real estate was affordable for a young couple. The two-story colonial sits on a quiet, tree-lined street with a garden Robert spent weekends tending until his heart gave out. Our 40-year marriage was everything I could have asked for. Robert was an electrician who worked his way up to owning his own company, and I taught elementary school until I retired at 60. We raised David here, watched him graduate from UC Davis with his engineering degree, and celebrated every milestone in this very living room. The house itself tells the story of our lives together. The kitchen still has the butcher block countertops Robert installed when David started middle school. The living room walls displayed decades of family photos from David's first steps to his college graduation. The hardwood floors creak in all the familiar places, and I know every corner of this home by heart. Robert painted the exterior sage green because I mentioned liking the color once, and he surprised me with it for our 20th anniversary. David is 38 now, a software engineer who never married. He's always been independent, maybe too independent for his own good. As a child, he preferred computers to playground games, and that pattern continued into adulthood. He lives alone in a downtown Sacramento apartment, one of those modern high-rises with floor-to-ceiling windows and granite everything. His work involves developing applications for financial companies, and he earns good money, though he's never been forthcoming about his exact salary. After his father died, something shifted in him. He started visiting more often, calling to check on my health, and showing genuine concern about my diabetes management. Before Robert's death, David visited maybe once a month, usually staying for dinner and leaving by 8. Afterward, he began coming twice weekly, sometimes staying overnight in his old bedroom, when he claimed to be worried about leaving me alone. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 5 years ago during a routine physical. The doctor explained that my pancreas wasn't producing enough insulin to regulate my blood sugar properly. With Dr. Peterson's help, I learned to monitor my glucose levels 4 times daily and give myself insulin injections twice a day, once in the morning and once before dinner. The routine became second nature within months, and my levels stabilized beautifully. My daily diabetes management involves testing my blood sugar when I wake up, calculating the appropriate insulin dose based on what I plan to eat, and injecting the medication into my thigh or abdomen. Dr. Peterson taught me to rotate injection sites to prevent scar tissue buildup. I keep detailed logs of my numbers, and every 3 months, blood work confirms that my diabetes is well controlled. The discipline required actually gave me a sense of accomplishment, knowing I was actively managing my health. Our house has appreciated significantly over the decades. The neighborhood transformed from working class to upscale, with young families attracted to the excellent schools and mature trees. Similar homes now sell for over $1 million, a figure that seems impossible when I remember paying $90,000 for this place. I never thought much about the value until David began asking questions about my plans for the property during our weekly dinners. He'd mention estate planning, casually suggesting I should get things in order for peace of mind. These conversations always felt premature to me since I'm healthy and active, but David insisted that responsible adults plan ahead. He'd reference friends whose parents died without proper paperwork, causing family disputes and legal complications. His concern seemed natural for a son who'd lost his father and didn't want to face similar chaos. David works remotely most days from his downtown apartment, a sleek, modern place that costs him nearly $3,000 a month in rent. The building has amenities like a fitness center and rooftop pool luxuries, that seem excessive to someone who raised a family on a teacher's salary. He's always been good with technology, but struggled with personal relationships. In high school, he had few friends and never brought girlfriends home. Robert used to worry that David was too focused on achievements, too disconnected from people who could provide emotional support. I defended him throughout his childhood and into adulthood, believing he simply needed time to find his way. Some people are late bloomers with relationships, I reasoned. His career success proved his intelligence and work ethic qualities that would eventually attract the right partner. I hoped marriage and children might soften his edges and bring out the warmth I knew existed beneath his reserved exterior. The Tuesday that changed everything started ordinarily enough. I spent the morning working in Robert's garden, pulling weeds from the tomato beds and watering the roses he'd planted for our anniversary years ago. The physical activity helps regulate my blood sugar, and the garden keeps me connected to Robert's memory. Around noon, I came inside to test my glucose and prepare lunch. I was making pot roast for dinner, David's favorite meal since childhood. The recipe came from Robert's mother, passed down through 3 generations of Martinez women. I'd been slow cooking the beef since morning, and the aroma filled the kitchen with comfort and anticipation. David had always loved coming home to that smell, and I hoped it might spark some of the warmth that seemed to be missing from our recent interactions. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang with David's number. His voice carried unusual excitement as he said he had wonderful news to share over dinner. He also mentioned bringing someone along, a colleague who could help with some health concerns I'd mentioned. I was puzzled since I hadn't mentioned any health concerns, but David explained that he'd been researching diabetes complications and wanted expert advice about my care. I remember feeling grateful that my son cared enough to bring professional help. Setting an extra place at the dining room table, I looked forward to whatever good news he wanted to share. Perhaps he'd gotten a promotion, or maybe he'd finally met someone special. The anticipation made the afternoon pass quickly as I finished dinner preparations and tidied the house. David arrived at 6:30 sharp with a man he introduced as Dr. Williams, his friend from college, who now practiced internal medicine in Sacramento. I was surprised since I hadn't scheduled any appointment, but David explained he'd been worried about recent comments I'd made about feeling tired. I couldn't recall making such comments, but maybe I had mentioned fatigue without thinking much about it. Dr. Williams appeared young, probably early 30s, with an eager demeanor and expensive-looking briefcase. He wore a well-tailored suit and spoke confidently about diabetes management and the importance of regular monitoring for patients my age. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and his manner professional. He complimented my home and commented on how well-maintained everything appeared. During dinner, Dr. Williams asked detailed questions about my daily routine, my exercise habits, and my stress levels. He seemed particularly interested in my sleep patterns and whether I'd noticed any changes in my energy or mood. David nodded along encouragingly, adding observations about my behavior that I didn't recognize as accurate. According to him, I'd been more forgetful lately and had complained about dizziness several times. After we finished eating, Dr. Williams suggested a quick examination in my living room. He checked my blood pressure with a digital cuff from his briefcase, listened to my heart with a stethoscope, and asked me to walk across the room while he observed my balance. Everything seemed routine and professional, exactly what I'd expect from a thorough physician. When I mentioned that I felt fine and my blood sugar readings had been stable for months, Dr. Williams frowned and pulled out official-looking papers from his briefcase. He said recent lab work David had shared showed concerning fluctuations that indicated my diabetes was becoming harder to control. I was confused since I hadn't had recent lab work beyond my regular quarterly check with Dr. Peterson 3 weeks earlier. David quickly explained he'd arranged additional testing through his company's health program as a surprise. He said he'd been worried about my health since Dad's death and wanted to make sure I was getting the best possible care. The thoughtfulness touched me, even though I wished he'd discussed it with me first. Dr. Williams spread the lab results across my coffee table, pointing to numbers that meant nothing to me, but apparently indicated trouble. The glucose readings on these new lab reports were significantly higher than anything I'd seen in years of managing my diabetes. Dr. Williams explained that my body was developing insulin resistance, a common progression in type 2 diabetes that required stronger medication to prevent serious complications. He spoke about potential damage to my kidneys, eyes, and nervous system if we didn't act quickly to bring my numbers under control. His recommendation was immediate and dramatic. Switch to a higher dose insulin that would better control my levels and prevent the complications he'd described. The way he explained it made perfect medical sense, and David nodded along, expressing relief that we'd caught the problem before permanent damage occurred. Dr. Williams emphasized that early intervention was crucial for maintaining my independence and quality of life. What bothered me was David's unusual interest in my paperwork during the medical discussion. While Dr. Williams prepared the new prescription, David asked about my will, whether I'd updated beneficiaries on my bank accounts, and if I'd considered transferring the house deed to avoid probate issues later. These weren't topics we'd discussed before, and his sudden concern felt odd timing for a medical visit. When I asked why he was thinking about such things, David said, losing Dad had made him realize how quickly things could change. He'd been reading about estate planning and learned that proper preparation could save families significant stress and expense during difficult times. He suggested we schedule a meeting with my lawyer soon to review everything and make sure my wishes would be honored if anything happened to my health. Dr. Williams handed me a prescription for insulin that was nearly double my current dose. He emphasized the importance of taking it exactly as prescribed, warning that missing doses could lead to dangerous spikes in blood sugar that might require hospitalization. He also suggested I might experience some dizziness initially as my body adjusted to the stronger medication, which was completely normal and would pass within a few weeks. David offered to pick up the prescription immediately, showing more enthusiasm about my medical care than I'd ever seen. He said he'd drive to the 24-hour pharmacy and have the medication ready for my morning injection. His eagerness seemed touching at the time, evidence of how much he cared about my well-being and wanted to help manage my health properly. Before leaving, Dr. Williams scheduled a follow-up visit for the weekend to monitor my adjustment to the new medication. He said it was important to track my response closely during the first few days, and he wanted to be available if I experienced any concerning symptoms. David agreed immediately, saying he'd make sure to be there for the appointment to help with any questions I might have. That night, after they left, I sat in my recliner holding the prescription bottle and felt an uncomfortable knot in my stomach. Something about the evening felt wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The medical explanation made sense, but David's behavior seemed different somehow. I decided to wait until morning to start the new medication, wanting to think things through clearly before making such a significant change to my diabetes management routine. The next morning, I woke with the same uneasy feeling that had troubled my sleep. After testing my blood sugar and finding it perfectly normal, I decided to call Dr. Peterson's office and request an appointment. I'd been seeing him for 15 years, and he knew my medical history better than anyone. His nurse Sandra had watched me learn to manage my diabetes and celebrated every good report with genuine enthusiasm. When I explained about the previous evening's visit and the dramatic medication change Dr. Williams recommended, Sandra's tone shifted from friendly to concerned. She squeezed me in for an appointment that afternoon, asking me to bring the new prescription and any paperwork Dr. Williams had shown me. Sandra said Dr. Peterson would want to review everything carefully before I made any changes to my established routine. I spent the morning trying to remember exactly what David had said about arranging lab work through his company. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. His software company provided excellent health insurance, but they didn't operate medical testing facilities. How would he have arranged lab work without my knowledge, and why wouldn't he have told me about it beforehand? At Dr. Peterson's office that afternoon, I brought the prescription bottle and the lab results Dr. Williams had shown me. Dr. Peterson examined the paperwork with growing concern, his eyebrows drawing together as he studied the numbers. He pulled up my actual recent lab results from 2 weeks prior on his computer screen and showed me the comparison. The difference was startling and impossible to explain. My real lab results showed blood sugar levels that were perfectly controlled, exactly where they should be for someone managing diabetes well. The A1C test, which measures average blood sugar over 3 months, was excellent. Every indicator showed that my current insulin regimen was working beautifully with no need for changes whatsoever. The lab results Dr. Williams had shown were completely different with my name and birth date, but drastically elevated numbers that would indeed warrant immediate medication changes. Dr. Peterson explained that these results would indicate uncontrolled diabetes requiring aggressive intervention. But the dates on the false reports overlapped with my real lab work, making it impossible for both sets to be legitimate. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone had created false medical records using my personal information. Dr. Peterson's face was grim as he explained that the insulin dose Dr. Williams prescribed was dangerously high for someone with my actual blood sugar levels. Taking that much insulin could cause severe hypoglycemia, potentially leading to confusion, memory loss, seizures, or even death. He asked if I'd taken any of the new medication, and I felt grateful for my instinct to wait. Dr. Peterson said that in a healthy person, that dose could cause blood sugar to drop so low, it would create symptoms that mimicked dementia or mental illness. Someone taking that medication would appear confused, disoriented, and incapable of making rational decisions about their own care. Dr. Peterson suggested I contact the medical board about Dr. Williams immediately, but I asked him to wait while I investigated further. Something about David's behavior the night before was starting to make terrible sense, and I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before taking official action. I promised to keep him informed and to avoid the dangerous medication completely. On the drive home, I started remembering other strange conversations David and I had shared over recent months. He'd asked about my mortgage status, whether the house was fully paid off, and if I'd ever considered downsizing to something more manageable. He'd mentioned seeing advertisements for beautiful retirement communities with medical staff on site, suggesting they might offer more security than living alone. He'd also inquired about my banking habits, whether I used online services or preferred handling everything in person. David had offered multiple times to help me set up automatic bill payments and online account management, saying it would be more convenient and secure than my current paper-based system. At the time, his offers seemed helpful, but now they felt more sinister. That evening, I searched for Dr. Williams online using my laptop. His medical license was legitimate but recent, granted just 8 months ago after completing his residency at UC Davis Medical Center. His practice was barely established, operating from a shared medical building downtown, with minimal online presence. The website was basic, with stock photos and generic descriptions of services rather than detailed information about his background or specialties. I found it curious that someone so new to medicine would be making dramatic medication changes for a patient he'd just met, especially when contradicting the established care of an experienced physician. Most new doctors are cautious about overriding other physicians' treatment plans, particularly for conditions that appear well controlled. I began paying closer attention to David's behavior during our phone conversations and visits. I noticed him looking through mail on my kitchen counter, asking casual questions about bills and financial statements, and mentioning how expensive home maintenance was becoming. He'd started conversations about my independence, suggesting that living alone at my age might not be safe much longer, especially with a medical condition that could cause emergencies. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore any longer. Friday evening, David called to check on my progress with the new medication. I told him I'd been taking it as prescribed, which was a lie. He seemed pleased and said he'd visit over the weekend with Dr. Williams for a follow-up examination. Something in his tone, a barely concealed excitement, made me suspicious enough to plan accordingly. I spent Friday night researching insulin overdose symptoms online and learning about medical fraud cases involving elderly patients. The information was disturbing, but enlightening. Criminals often targeted older adults with chronic conditions using fake medical emergencies to gain control over their victims' finances and property. The insulin scheme was particularly cruel because it would make the victim appear mentally incompetent rather than physically ill. Saturday morning, I prepared for David and Dr. Williams' visit by positioning myself strategically in my bedroom. I moved a chair close to the door and left it cracked open just enough to give me a clear view of the living room where they would likely have their private conversation. I also activated the voice recorder on my phone, hoping to capture anything important they might say. When they arrived Saturday afternoon, I greeted them normally and complained of feeling slightly dizzy since starting the new medication. Dr. Williams nodded knowingly and said this was expected as my body adjusted to better glucose control. David seemed pleased by my report, asking if I'd had any trouble remembering to take the injections or confusion about the dosage. I played along, mentioning that I'd been a bit forgetful about small things and had felt unsteady on my feet a few times. Dr. Williams and David exchanged meaningful glances, and the doctor said these symptoms showed the medication was beginning to work properly. He recommended I rest while they discussed the next steps in my treatment plan. Excusing myself for a nap, I retreated to my bedroom, but left the door open enough to monitor their conversation. I positioned myself in the chair where I could see and hear everything, while remaining hidden from their view. What I heard in the next 20 minutes destroyed every assumption I had about my son's character, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the person I'd raised. David's voice carried a cold calculation I'd never heard before as he spoke to Dr. Williams about increasing my dosage further. He said, "Increase her dose, doc. I need her confused enough to sign the papers." The casual way he referred to me as an obstacle to overcome, rather than his mother who loved him, chilled me to the bone. Dr. Williams responded with clinical detachment about how higher insulin doses would cause frequent dizzy spells and memory issues in someone with normal blood sugar levels. They discussed timing, like scientists planning an experiment calculating how long it would take for the symptoms to appear severe enough to warrant guardianship proceedings. David mentioned he'd already consulted with an elder law attorney about the process of having someone declared mentally incompetent due to medical issues. Their conversation revealed a partnership I never could have imagined in my worst nightmares. David owed significant money from failed cryptocurrency investments, nearly $200,000 borrowed against credit cards and personal loans. He'd been gambling with digital currencies for over a year, convinced he could make enough money to quit his job and start his own company. Instead, he'd lost everything and fallen deep into debt. He'd calculated that my house in today's market would sell for approximately $1,200,000. After paying his debts and splitting proceeds with Dr. Williams as agreed, he'd still have enough money to relocate somewhere with lower costs and start fresh. The plan was simple and brutal. Make me appear mentally incompetent, gain legal guardianship, sell my house, and use the proceeds to solve his financial problems. The most devastating part was listening to David discuss my future with such detachment. He'd researched nursing homes that specialized in dementia care, places where confused elderly patients could be kept indefinitely without family visits. He spoke about my age as if it made my life less valuable, saying I wouldn't need a large house much longer anyway, and that selling it was really just accelerating the inevitable. Dr. Williams suggested that if I became too resistant to the medication changes or started asking too many questions, they could arrange for psychiatric evaluation and involuntary commitment. He knew psychiatrists who would cooperate with their diagnosis of medication-induced dementia, especially if I appeared confused and agitated during examinations. The system was designed to protect vulnerable adults, but they planned to use those same protections to destroy my autonomy. I remained frozen behind my bedroom door, recording everything on my phone, while trying to process that my only child was planning to destroy my mind and steal my life's work. The betrayal cut deeper than Robert's death had, because his leaving was beyond anyone's control. David was choosing to harm me for money, calculating the destruction of his mother's life like a business transaction. Sunday morning, I called Patricia Rothstein, the family lawyer who'd helped Robert and me with our wills and estate planning years earlier. Patricia had known David since he was a teenager, watching him grow up during our occasional legal consultations. The shock in her voice when I played the recording was unmistakable, and she immediately grasped the severity of what I'd discovered. Patricia explained that David and Dr. Williams had committed multiple felonies in their recorded conversation: conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, identity theft for the false medical records, and potentially attempted murder given the medication dosages involved. She said the evidence was strong, but proving the case would require more documentation than just the recording. We needed evidence of David's financial troubles to establish motive proof of Dr. Williams's participation in creating false medical records and documentation of their plan to manipulate legal documents for guardianship. Patricia suggested I continue pretending to take the medication while we built a stronger case, but she insisted I take precautions to protect my safety. I contacted Dr. Peterson and explained the situation in detail. His anger at Dr. Williams was professional and personal, since medical fraud damaged the reputation of legitimate physicians and put vulnerable patients at risk. He provided me with saline solution in insulin packaging, identical to my real medication, but completely harmless. The solution would allow me to continue the charade without endangering my health. Dr. Peterson also gave me materials that would help me mimic the symptoms of insulin overdose without actually experiencing them. He explained what confusion and memory loss would look like to outside observers, and we practiced responses I could use to appear affected by the medication while maintaining my actual mental clarity. The performance would be crucial to gathering more evidence. The hardest part was changing my will without David's knowledge. Patricia arranged for me to visit her office Monday morning while David was at work. We created a new will, leaving my house and savings to the local children's hospital, where I'd volunteered for years. If David succeeded in having me declared incompetent and gaining guardianship, he'd discover too late that there was nothing left for him to steal. I also established a new bank account at a different institution and transferred most of my savings there. Patricia held the account information and access codes, ensuring David couldn't locate or freeze my assets if he gained temporary guardianship. We prepared documents that would immediately revoke any guardianship if I was found competent by independent medical evaluation. Patricia contacted Detective Maria Santos at the Sacramento Police Department, an officer who specialized in elder abuse cases and was familiar with medical fraud schemes. Detective Santos explained that they needed David to take concrete steps toward executing his plan before they could make arrests. The recording provided evidence of intent, but they needed proof of action to build a solid case. Detective Santos arranged for officers to be ready when we gathered enough evidence, and she provided me with a special phone number to call if I felt in immediate danger. She also connected me with social services advocates who could provide support throughout the legal process and help me understand my rights as an elder abuse victim. The psychological preparation was almost as challenging as the practical planning. I had to accept that my son had chosen money over my life, that every caring gesture over the past months had been manipulation designed to gain my trust before he destroyed me. I grieved for the David I thought I knew while preparing to protect myself from the David who actually existed. I spent Sunday evening going through old photo albums, remembering the little boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, and the teenager who'd hugged me after graduation. Somewhere along the way, that person had disappeared, replaced by someone who could plan his mother's destruction with clinical efficiency. I mourned the loss of my son, even though he was still alive. Tuesday evening, David arrived with Dr. Williams for what they called a medication adjustment visit. I played my part perfectly, greeting them with mild confusion about why they were there and asking if we'd met before. David's excitement at my apparent cognitive decline was barely concealed as he guided me to my favorite chair and patiently explained they were there to help with my health. I stumbled slightly while walking to the living room, caught myself on the doorframe, and apologized for being clumsy. Dr. Williams examined me with theatrical concern, checking my blood pressure and asking questions designed to test my memory and orientation. I gave responses that indicated confusion about dates and recent events while maintaining enough coherence to seem partially functional. David immediately suggested I might be more comfortable in a care facility where medical professionals could monitor me around the clock. He produced paperwork he claimed would temporarily transfer my financial responsibilities to him for my own protection. The documents looked official and legitimate, but I knew Patricia had prepared identical forms with different legal language that would protect, rather than endanger my interests. I signed the false papers with a deliberately shaky hand, playing the role of a confused elderly woman grateful for her son's guidance during a frightening time. David's satisfaction was obvious as he witnessed my apparent surrender of autonomy. Dr. Williams declared that my condition required immediate hospitalization for comprehensive evaluation and medication adjustment. David called an ambulance, telling the dispatcher his mother was experiencing severe diabetic complications with confusion and disorientation. His performance was convincing, mixing genuine concern with relief that his plan was progressing smoothly. The paramedics arrived quickly and transported me to Sacramento General Hospital, where Dr. Peterson had arranged for colleagues to receive me. At the hospital, I continued the charade while secretly coordinating with Detective Santos through carefully timed text messages. The medical staff, briefed by Dr. Peterson and Patricia, played along while running legitimate tests that would prove my actual health was perfect. They documented everything carefully, creating an official record of David's deception and Dr. Williams's fraudulent medical claims. David spent the evening making phone calls from the hospital waiting room, contacting nursing homes to discuss availability for dementia patients, and calling real estate agents about property valuations in my neighborhood. His efficiency in dismantling my life was breathtaking and revealed how long he'd been planning this betrayal. He'd researched every detail, prepared for every contingency, except the possibility that I might discover his scheme. Wednesday morning, David arrived at the hospital with guardianship paperwork already completed and a tablet computer showing real estate listings in my neighborhood. He'd scheduled home appraisals for Thursday and contacted moving companies about estate sales services. His thoroughness was impressive and terrifying, demonstrating how completely he'd planned to erase my independent existence. Dr. Williams visited Wednesday afternoon with additional medication and detailed instructions for the nursing facility staff. He spoke to David about my prognosis with the same casual tone they'd used when planning my mental destruction days earlier. I watched my son nodding along as another man described the best methods to keep his mother confused and compliant in institutional care. The nursing home David selected was 40 minutes from Sacramento, far enough to discourage casual visitors, but close enough for him to maintain legal oversight as my guardian. The facility specialized in dementia care and had a reputation for keeping patients heavily medicated and manageable. David toured the facility Wednesday afternoon and placed a deposit on a private room, telling staff his mother would arrive by Friday. Thursday morning brought the culmination of David's planning as he finalized arrangements for my permanent institutionalization. He'd contacted utility companies about disconnecting services at my house, scheduled estate sale companies to evaluate my belongings, and even researched landscaping services to maintain the property while it was listed for sale. Every detail was planned with business-like efficiency. Thursday afternoon brought Detective Santos and 2 uniformed officers to my hospital room, just as David was completing transfer paperwork for the memory care facility. I sat up in bed completely alert and healthy, speaking clearly as David's face went through a remarkable transformation from confidence to confusion to absolute horror. Detective Santos announced that both David and Dr. Williams were under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and attempted murder. The recording I'd made was clear evidence of their intent to harm me for financial gain, and the false medical records provided additional proof of their criminal scheme. Dr. Williams, faced with overwhelming evidence, immediately began confessing in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. David's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and desperate bargaining as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. He claimed he'd only wanted to help me manage my finances safely, that I was too old to handle such responsibilities alone, and that he deserved to inherit the house eventually anyway. His arguments fell apart when confronted with the recording of his own voice describing his plan to destroy my mental capacity. When faced with evidence of his cryptocurrency debts and his detailed plans to incapacitate me, David finally admitted to the scheme, but insisted he never intended permanent harm. He claimed the plan was temporary, just long enough to solve his financial problems, and that he would have restored my independence afterward. The officers and prosecutors found his explanations unconvincing, given the permanent nature of the brain damage his medication plan could have caused. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of their partnership and identified other potential victims. Dr. Williams had been paid $15,000 up front, with promises of splitting the house sale proceeds. He'd created false medical records for 3 other elderly patients in similar schemes, though I was the first case where they'd attempted to execute their plan completely. David's financial records showed gambling losses of over $250,000 in cryptocurrency investments over 18 months. He'd borrowed against credit cards, taken personal loans, and even stolen money from his employer's client accounts to fund his speculative trading. His desperation had grown as losses mounted and creditors began demanding payment. The nursing home David had selected cooperated fully with the investigation after learning they'd been deceived about my condition. Staff members who specialized in dementia care were horrified to discover they'd been preparing to imprison a mentally healthy woman based on fraudulent medical information. The facility implemented new verification procedures to prevent similar deceptions in the future. During the 6-month legal process leading to trial, I testified before grand juries and met with prosecutors preparing their case. David's defense attorney tried to portray him as a desperate son, making poor decisions under extreme financial pressure. The prosecution focused on the calculated nature of his plan and his willingness to permanently destroy his mother's mind for money. The trial itself was emotionally devastating, but legally straightforward. The evidence was overwhelming, and Dr. Williams's detailed confession left little room for doubt about David's guilt. Expert witnesses testified about the likely effects of the insulin dosages David had planned, describing how they would have caused permanent brain damage and potentially death. David received 15 years in prison for elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and attempted murder. Dr. Williams received 10 years and permanently lost his medical license. The judge noted that crimes against vulnerable family members represented a particularly heinous breach of trust that warranted serious consequences beyond normal sentencing guidelines. I sold my house as planned, but for my own reasons rather than David's. The memories had become too painful, and I no longer felt safe in the place where my son had planned my destruction. Every room reminded me of his betrayal, and I needed a fresh start somewhere without those associations. I moved to a comfortable apartment near Dr. Peterson's practice and donated most of the house sale proceeds to elder abuse prevention programs throughout California. The money David had planned to steal became funding for education programs that help seniors recognize and avoid financial exploitation by family members and predatory professionals. The healing process took longer than the legal proceedings and required professional counseling to address the trauma of such profound betrayal. I joined a support group for people victimized by family members, discovering that my experience wasn't as unique as I'd hoped. The group provided understanding and practical advice for rebuilding trust and self-confidence after intimate betrayal. Learning to trust my instincts again after being manipulated by someone I loved required therapy and patience with myself. I had to accept that David's actions reflected his character, not my failure as a mother. The guilt and self-blame were as challenging to overcome as the anger and hurt. But gradually, I found peace in knowing I'd protected myself when it mattered most. Today, I volunteer with Detective Santos's department, helping train officers to recognize elder abuse cases and supporting victims through the legal process. My experience provides credibility when talking to other seniors who struggle to believe their own family members could harm them. I help them understand that protecting yourself isn't betraying your family. It's honoring your own worth and dignity. I also work with medical professionals to identify signs of medication fraud and false medical records. Dr. Peterson and I developed training materials that help physicians verify patient information and recognize when treatment recommendations don't match established care patterns. The goal is preventing other families from experiencing the devastation I lived through. My relationship with David is permanently severed, and I've found peace with that reality. Some betrayals are too profound for forgiveness, especially when they involve calculated attempts to destroy someone's mind and steal their life's work. I don't hate him anymore, but I'll never trust him again, and I've accepted that some relationships can't be repaired. The friends who supported me through this crisis proved more loyal than my own son, teaching me that family isn't just about blood relations, but about people who genuinely care for your well-being. I've built new relationships based on mutual respect and honest communication, surrounding myself with people who add value to my life rather than threatening it. I learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish when someone tries to destroy you, even if that someone is family. Sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But we must never let their betrayal define our worth or limit our future happiness. I found strength I didn't know I possessed, and discovered that survival often requires courage we never thought we'd need. If this story resonates with you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to protect yourself when family became the threat? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences might help someone else recognize danger before it's too late. Don't forget to like this video if my story helped you understand the importance of trusting your instincts, and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming unexpected challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your safety and dignity matter more than maintaining relationships that threaten your well-being. I hope my story helps you recognize that you have more strength than you know, and that protecting yourself is always the right choice regardless of who disagrees. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is refusing to let others destroy you, even when those others share your DNA.